Since it's about 6 minutes after the hour and we have a lot to cover today. As folks join us, we'll remind them to sign into the chat as well. Okay, I'm going to go back to the beginning of the slides. Right. So again, if you're just joining us, you are at the City of Mesa HOME-ARP community meeting for housing for low-income households. And today we are going to give you a little bit of an overview of what HOME-ARP is about, including the amount of funds the city will be receiving, the eligible uses, and the eligible populations that can be served. The purpose of today's session is to gather community input, and so we're going to be asking for folks to share their thoughts on a series of questions during our discussion portion. You can either come off of mute and share your thoughts verbally, or you can add your thoughts into the chat, and we'll have that as a record for today's session as well. We're going to get started on just a short slide presentation. If you have signed up for multiple meetings, this part of today's session is going to be familiar because we are doing the slides for all of the community meetings so that everybody has just a basic understanding of what HOME-ARP is all about. The discussion questions that will follow the slides will be a little different for each of the topics. So today's session will focus primarily on issues related to housing. My name is Jennifer Alpha. I'm with TDA Consulting, and we have been asked by the city to assist in the development of their HOME-ARP allocation plan. We're going to talk about what the allocation plan is in just a moment. For the sake of time, I'll introduce the rest of our team. We have Doug Carlson, who will be leading us through the facilitation of the questions in just a bit. Alex, who y'all probably have received an email from with the information for this meeting. She's been helping coordinate the community outreach process. And then Noah Woodward, who is helping us with our data analysis. We also have staff from the city here. So I'm going to give Michelle an opportunity to start with saying hello.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Michelle Albanese, and I'm the Housing and Community Development Director here for the City of Mesa.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Justin Boyd, Housing and Community Development Administrator, and I sincerely appreciate you being here with us this afternoon.
Thanks, guys. Okay, if you are just joining us, please add to the chat your name, your organization, if you are affiliated with one, your zip code, so we can get a sense of the geography that we're covering in these community meetings, and then also your email address. And that will serve as our sign-in sheet for today. So I'm going to get started with some slides that will give you a basic understanding of the HOME-ARP program. Excuse me. HOME-ARP is a one-time allocation of funds under the American Rescue Plan. So these funds are in response to the pandemic, and they provide $5 billion across the country to assist individuals and households who are homeless, at risk of homelessness, and other vulnerable populations by providing housing, rental assistance, supportive services, and non-congregate shelter. And the purpose of this program is to help reduce homelessness and increase housing stability for folks all across the country. There are 651 state and local participating jurisdictions, or otherwise known as HUD grantees, excuse me, that qualified for an annual home program allocation for fiscal year 2021. And then that makes them also eligible to receive HOME-ARP grants. Now, the city itself, the city of Mesa, has been allocated just over $5.6 million. So that is the amount of home funds that the city will receive once it submits an allocation plan and that plan is approved. So HUD obligated these HOME-ARP funds back in September of 2021. And at that time, there was not a deadline for submitting the HOME-ARP allocation plan. That changed in November when HUD said there is a deadline for submitting the HOME-ARP allocation plan, and that deadline is March 31st, 2023. So it's coming up quickly. And the city is starting the process, or has started already, the process of developing this plan. So the plan includes both data analysis and community outreach, and you can think of it as sort of like a strategic plan for how the city plans to use the HOME-ARP funds. So this $5.6 million will be discussed in the plan, and it will be we'll talk about how the funds will be used based on the information that we've collected through the data analysis as well as the community outreach. So the data analysis is looking at lots of information around the demographics that of the folks that can be served by these allocations. It's also looking at the resources that are currently available in the city. And we're trying to assess the needs of the folks that this program can serve, and then identify the gaps in meeting those needs so that the city can have some idea of how these funds can best be spent to meet needs of the community. So the community outreach process is one of the most important parts of the development of this plan, because it allows us to reach out to the community and hear directly from residents and community stakeholders like service provider partners, housing developers, and things like that about what the community needs are. So there is a three-part process happening for community outreach. There is a online survey that is open currently, and we will drop the survey link into the chat. So if you have not come across this survey yet, you are welcome to complete that survey. If you are someone that has access to networks, if you're just an individual resident, but you use social media and you want to share it on social media, that's great. If you are with a stakeholder organization and you can share it to your mailing lists or on your own social media networks, that would be very appreciated, because folks are more likely to complete a survey when they hear about it from someone they know than if they just kind of stumble across it. So we're trying to have a really broad reach with the survey, and this will help us get the word out. So the survey is one part of the community outreach. The second part is these community meetings. We had a meeting yesterday that concentrated on discussions around homelessness and special needs. We're having this meeting right now on housing. There's a meeting later today on services, and there will be another meeting next week in the evening, and that meeting will be announced on the city's Facebook page and website. So you can look there for the exact dates and times for that meeting. That meeting will be held in the evening so that folks who are working during the day can attend. We'll probably focus a lot on services during that meeting, but we'll cover all the topics as well. And so keep an eye for that. So there'll be a total of these 4 community meetings. And then finally, we're doing stakeholder interviews. So we are doing around 20 interviews with stakeholders to kind of dig in on specific topics that we're hearing are of concern in the community through these other community outreach methods. And those interviews are ongoing. So once all of this information is collected, we have our data, we've analyzed it, we've done our community outreach, the city will then draft the full plan, and in the plan will be a distribution of funds that is proposed for the HOME-ARP allocation. We'll talk a little bit more towards the end of the meeting about what happens next with respect to development of the plan, but basically the plan will be put out for public comment before it goes to HUD for review and approval. So you can keep an eye out for that public comment period. That will give you an opportunity to see what's been proposed, and you can make comments on that as well. So the grants for this, this program expire September 30th, 2030. So there's about 8 more years-ish, 7 more years to spend the funds, but getting this plan in is the first step. All right. So let me share a little bit now about what HOME-ARP funds can do. So HOME-ARP can be used for 4 eligible activities, and this is the whole list of activities. You can't use it for anything else other than what you're seeing here on the screen. So you can use it for the production or preservation of affordable housing. It can be used for tenant-based rental assistance. It can be used for supportive services, homeless prevention services, and housing counseling. And it can be used for the purchase and development of non-congregate shelter. So those are the 4 eligible uses. Grantees are able to choose just one of these uses and spend all of the money on that particular use, or come up with a combination of uses and divide the funds across those uses based on the understanding of the needs that come out of this allocation plan process. So in addition to having 4 limited ways that you can spend the money, there are very specific rules around who can be served through these activities. And you can see on the screen here, there are 4 what HUD is calling qualifying populations. So these qualifying populations are the demographics of folks who can be served by HOME-ARP. So each of these definitions is very detailed. There's a lot of criteria within each definition, but in a shorthand, the qualifying populations are those who are experiencing homelessness, whether they're sheltered or unsheltered, those who are currently housed but at risk of homelessness, those fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking, and then other families that are requiring services or housing assistance to prevent homelessness. So basically any sort of vulnerable households that are facing housing instability. So those are the 4 different qualifying populations, or the folks who can be served by these HOME-ARP funds. So again, the purpose of today's meeting is to gather information from the community about the needs of those qualifying populations that I just described, and to better understand the resources that exist or are lacking in the community for meeting those needs. So what we hope we can do over the next 40 minutes or so is hear from you all about your experiences, the experience of those you know or you serve in your organizations. We'll have a list of discussion questions. I'm going to turn it over to Doug in a moment so that he can facilitate that conversation. And we welcome you to share information either through the chat or come off of mute. But this is an opportunity for us to hear from you about the needs in the community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Doug to get us started.
Thanks, Jennifer. I was answering a couple of questions in the chat. The presentation will be made available, because that's correct. That was one of the questions, or be posted on the city's website. So let's answer that really quick. Is that a yes, Jennifer? I think it is, right?
I think it's already been posted, hasn't it, Michelle?
Already posted, so there you go. Non-congregate housing or non-congregate shelter means dispersing the homeless population. If you think of a shelter, it's typically together all in one space, right? Lots of beds all in a similar space. The concept is to separate them. This is coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, where we wanted to and did separate many shelters, participants in shelters. So that to mitigate the spread of the virus. So let's go to the first question of the discussion. If you were at the homeless meeting yesterday, these are going to look very familiar to you. If you haven't been to a community meeting yet, we really want your feedback on these questions in one way or another. You have a couple of ways that you can do that. People are already using the chat, so you're more than welcome to use the chat feature to help answer these questions. You're also welcome to come off of mute and just answer the question directly if you want, whatever you're comfortable with. But we have 8 questions that we need to go through, so we want to make sure that we get your feedback on all 8 of these questions. What is the biggest challenge? The first one, of course, is what is the biggest challenge for low and moderate income households when it comes to finding and securing housing? And then the cost of housing, of course, we've heard multiple times. And the inventory being in good condition, especially for affordable housing. We heard that yesterday as well. Anything else? Lack of units is coming up a lot in your region as one of the reasons for this in Mesa and the greater valley. Paperwork, yeah, there's been some discussions about facilitating that for folks, right? Using navigators and rental housing in particular, working with landlords, trying to deal with the paperwork issues, background checks, all those types of things, right? Yeah, and so navigation, yeah. And landlords not being leasing units and restricting in one way or another. So those are all, thank you. Those are all answers that we've seen before. And then the criminal background issue as well has come up. Yes, thank you. Great. The elderly population has been mentioned as well. So thank you for your comment about folks who are older and then and not feeling well. So appreciate that. All great comments. And again, you can come off mute if you want to actually comment directly as well, but the chat works just fine if you want to do that.
Have you guys, has anyone ever mentioned like for the low income or like vulnerable homeless people, people getting released from prison or a facility, like whether it's, medical facility, like a release from a rehab or, prison or jail? Has anyone ever mentioned?
No, they haven't, but so thank you for mentioning that. What has been mentioned is children aging out of foster care or being released from some setting where they're become independent because of their age. That has been mentioned before. People leaving institutions has not come up before. So appreciate the comment.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. And then the lack of senior housing and some of the issues of being priced out and pushed out because of the huge increases in rent. So thank you. Yep, those are all very real issues. We've heard that before. Go to the next question. Yeah, veterans are a subpopulation, umbrella population, all of the qualifying populations for HOME-ARP. So any veteran that meets one of the other qualifying population standards is considered a separate targeted subpopulation for the HOME-ARP program. So the next question, I think Jennifer will throw that in here as well. And then not getting vouchers is another thing that has come up quite a bit. We know that we talked to the Housing Authority earlier. This morning, they're at a 92% lease up rate. They're trying to get it back up to their norm, which is 98, 99% lease up rate. And that's just dealing with the housing supply and the cost of housing. So perfect comment. Yes, good timing. Question 2, what housing types are in short supply? And we're typically looking at people who have special needs in one way or another, disabled, people who are struggling with CMI, other types of issues. Are there types of housing specifically for those populations that are in short supply that the community needs? Single level. Accessibility has come up actually very recently in our discussion as well, that many of the units that might be available are not accessible. And then we heard that from the Housing Authority today, actually, and others. So yeah, so accessible housing types, right? And then larger units as well, right? Who have a person who is disabled in the family. It's a good one, thank you. I don't think we've heard that before. So overall supply, lack of supply is coming up all the time in every form. So this is just a good example of that same situation. I think we can go to question 3, Jennifer. Or Alex, I forgot. Special needs would be people who can't necessarily live independently, people who are suffering from physical or mental disability of some kind, CMI. That would be typically how we would define it. People who need certain type of specialized housing, either because of that disability or the need to be supported with a caregiver or an aide of some kind. Okay, third question. So for housing development, and again, we know about the supply issues in inventory issues in the city of Mesa, but for developing housing, what's the biggest challenge to structuring projects that serve the most vulnerable members of the community. And what we mean by that are the populations we're trying to target through HOME-ARP, which are folks who are homeless and people who are at risk of homeless, primarily. Subpopulations of victims of domestic violence and human trafficking are also part of the HOME-ARP qualifying population, along with veterans.
I think what challenge is, do these people, these victims, like have a place to go? Like, do they have is there a specialized resource for these people to go, you know, to get like help, you know, like after, I mean, what do you do after the victims of trafficking or whatever? Where do they go to find these resources? You know, is there a specific, because I've never heard of anything like that.
So I don't know the exact answer to that, but it's a great question. What I do know is that there are some nonprofit agencies in the area that serve victims of domestic violence and human trafficking. We spoke with one this morning who identified 68% of their population as being domestic violence. It's a women's facility, and 68% of their households or a client group were victims of domestic violence, and about a third were victims of human trafficking. So there are service agencies that are referred to. There are also navigation centers and other places, 211, crisis lines, other types of things that are used to help channel people into the appropriate services and housing. That's about the best answer I can give, since I don't know specifically what's in the region. But that's just based on our conversations recently. More need for navigation, right? Case management and services. So that would be wraparound case management and services. That needs to be combined with the housing. I mean, one of the things I heard today, for example, is that having built-in services with the housing units is kind of critical to be making it not only effective for in a living environment or as affordable housing, but for the actual services needed by the client group. Right. And finding availability. Yeah.
I will real quickly, could you give me just instead of like a 30% of the average low income, like what low income is defined as like a monthly income, as opposed to like 30% of fair, because that kind of doesn't really make sense. As
Yeah, so for most,
if you don't mind, sorry.
no, that's okay. For most HUD programs, low and moderate income is defined as a household that is at 80% or below of median income. A low income household would be defined as a household, and that's all the household members, at 50% and below of area median income. Extremely low or very low households, this is not homeless households, this is just income in general, are defined, extremely low incomes are defined at 30% and below of area median income. So it varies by the region, and there are HUD data tables that actually kind of define by household size what that income level is, but that's how it's typically defined. No, it's not tied to the cost of living. It's tied to, not the cost of living, it's tied to the income of the household, unfortunately. And again, this is how it's done for HUD programs. That's just my example.
Yeah, I'll pull those numbers and I'll put them in the chat as we're talking.
Yeah. And then neighborhood NIMBY and neighborhood opposition, I'm seeing that being mentioned, is also coming up in almost all of our discussions. So thanks for adding that. That is definitely happening. The need for outreach, for landlord navigation, for community outreach, for other types of things dealing with the issues of not in my backyard type issues in communities, which is happening all across the country. And Mary, thank you. Mary is providing her example of the income limits that they use for their programs. Thank you. Appreciate it. She already put that in. And those income levels are gross income, not net income. Thanks. So, okay, I think we can go to the fourth question. So this question asks about preservation of existing affordable housing. There are units that we know that may have been affordable at one point in time and then went to market rate. for one reason or another. A good example of that are expiring tax credit projects, which have a 15-year compliance period, after which they can convert to market rate housing. So this question is asking, what can you do to preserve existing affordable housing? Because not only are you dealing with increases in rents and prices, you're dealing with the inventory shrinking, it sounds like, in your area. Saw the comment about training police officers effectively dealing with people with chronic mental illness and who are homeless, etc. Yeah, a lot of agencies are now doing what's called trauma-informed care for their client groups, and that is also a training program that allows people to understand how you deal with people who are victims, who have PTSD or are victims in some way. Predatory buying, yeah. Flipping, yeah, very much. Yeah, that's happening in a lot of Western cities. I live in Portland, Oregon. Same thing is happening in Portland. Thank you. Yes, and state and local legislation around rent issues, landlord-tenant rights, etc., are beyond the HOME-ARP allocation plan, but very important. And then, yes, there's a lot of property buying and flipping happening everywhere in the West. Yep. Yeah, it's happening, particularly in areas of the Sun Belt. No doubt about it. Great, thank you. All great answers, thank you. Next question, I think, Jennifer, please. Dealing with, yeah, that's a good one. Can I just add this if we're taking notes, and I'm sure Alex is, the how you deal with property taxes and other expenses for developers and homeowners who are low income or to do these types of projects. Abatements, other types of programs are often used in communities to help make it easier to develop affordable housing. So there are some regulatory relief that happens from that. So that's a really good suggestion. Thanks. So question 5, what gaps exist in services or housing models for those experiencing homelessness or who are at risk of homelessness? This is something that we ask a lot of providers that we interview. That is, what are the gaps? What is needed either in the on the housing side or services side in your experience for people who are either experiencing homelessness or who are at risk of homelessness? Services can run a wide range of different types of things, and I won't mention any right now, but to get you going, but if I need to, I will. Services can include childcare, transportation, healthcare, other types of things, drug treatment, yeah. One-stop shop or call-in service, right? Yeah. We've heard a lot about navigation centers as well, trauma-informed treatment, yeah, mental health services, great, perfect. Employment has come up actually several times as well, thank you, yeah. Yeah, and the need for different types of housing options and a ladder, if you will, shelter to transitional to permanent housing or permanent supportive housing, that has come up as well, great. No, this won't be able to deal with any restrictions on people who are 55 plus, unfortunately. This is just basically a resource for different types of activities that are eligible under the program. It really won't be able to deal with restrictions, policies, land use regulations, laws, state laws. It won't be able to impact that, unfortunately. Independent living solutions. That's a good one. Thank you. Yeah, that's not just, yeah, that's for a lot of populations. So I think that's a great one. Thank you. Case management. Excellent. And the need for healthcare. Yeah. Fantastic. Really good. Okay, I think we can go to question 6, please. So this is a little twist on the prior question, but it asks about what gaps in services or housing are needed for those who are housed but are vulnerable and susceptible to becoming homeless, who are disabled and or have special needs. So what do we need for people to keep them from falling into homelessness? Or we've already heard a lot about accessible housing, et cetera. So that's great. We've got that. But we are also on the services side are the things that are needed, and on the housing side for these populations, people who are at risk of falling into homelessness or who are disabled or have special needs. So if you work with or happen to know an agency that works with certain populations and are familiar with the gaps that they're dealing with in terms of service availability, housing available, but behavioral health, thank you. Yeah. There's a couple of agencies that deal with behavioral health services in the area, but not a lot. Well, the models vary, by the way, by agency. Typically, these are carried out by nonprofit organizations, so the models are quite varied between them. Diversion or not losing housing or prevention those are all terms that are used to keep people from losing their housing. So thanks for putting that up there, because diversion is really important. Keeps people from falling into homelessness, addiction treatment. Navigation, I think, would be related to the time it takes to apply for housing and deal with trying to get into different types of housing. The need for more case management and social workers. There's a real gap right now, unfortunately, in the number of people who are doing this type of work. A lot of burnout from COVID. A lot of people have left the industry because of that. Yeah, and caregivers are part of that as well. Yep, absolutely. Okay, let's go to the next question, please, Jennifer. Education is always important. Thank you, Dr. Padilla. Yeah, education is always important around these issues. I think once people know what's happening and how the populations are growing and why, I think that makes a huge difference. Totally agree. Along those lines, what fair housing challenges do you see in your community? What information do you know that's available? We're always trying to collect more data and information to help us understand the gaps that are out there with services and housing. So if you're aware of any types of fair housing challenges out there, please let us know what you think those are. And I don't know, I think that stands for City of Mesa. I don't think the City of Mesa has a 24-hour hotline. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, please. But I don't think they have. Education, again, yeah. Fair housing, there is the Fair Housing Act, which is a federal law that prohibits discrimination based on a number of different protected classes, such as race and ethnicity, gender. There's a number of other things, but yeah, that is a federal law. But because it's a federal law, it applies to every community and their housing environment, and it applies to all of the federal programs that are administered, including those administered by HUD. HUD is actually the Fair Housing Enforcement Agency for the U.S., for the federal government. Yeah, issues with credit. Yep. Yeah, neighborhood opposition is another challenge, no doubt about that. That's coming up a lot. Great, thank you. Those are great. Those are all great answers. I actually heard this earlier today, so I really appreciate the fact that families have to move sometimes to get more affordable units available to them, which takes their children out of the education system and takes them out of the community or neighborhood they're in and transports them into a brand new one, which is not good. Yep, and age is a factor with it when it comes to affordable housing, by the way. Age discrimination is common across the board. Let's go to the last question, please, Jennifer, and then you can give them the next steps. So We are talking again to you in a number of different organizations. We're having multiple community meetings. One of the purposes behind that is to find out what other opportunities we have for collaboration as part of this consultation and planning process to help inform the city about what the needs are that are out there. So if there are opportunities for collaboration that you're aware of, that you think that could occur as a result of this money being available, this $5.6 million being available, please let us know what you think those are.
I have a thing about collaboration. One thing is my friend, like he actually was homeless. Okay. He has a home that was owned by family members who passed away and nobody ever transferred title. And he's kind of going through that right now because he didn't know how to, so I'm helping him. But even when he does, finally get title to the house, like he doesn't have any income. He's low income.
Mhm.
But he'd be willing to rent out people, rent a room because he has a 3-bedroom house, so he would he'd have 2 available rooms. Maybe something like if the city wanted to work with homeowners that had that extra space and that were willing to, I guess, I don't know, host, low income people or, something like that.
Mhm.
Is that some kind of collaboration you guys would work with, or does it have to be like an organization? Like, could you not work with like individual homeowners?
Well, right now, the city hasn't determined what activities it's going to fund or how they're going to carry those activities out, but shared housing models do
Yeah,
exist
shared
out
housing.
there. And so you're talking about a shared housing model. Those have been used in other communities when inventory is extremely low or affordability is an issue. So that is a potential model, but again, the city has not even developed a budget for its HOME-ARP program or decided which activities it's going to carry out yet. But I understand what you're saying. And shared housing is one approach to dealing with affordability. So appreciate that. More neighborhood outreach. Yeah, that's great. And I think the city's doing an amazing job, frankly, of putting information out right now on their website. If you haven't looked lately, they're doing a fabulous job of that right now. Yeah, I can't answer specific questions about different developments, unfortunately, as part of this process. And I'm not familiar with it, so I apologize. Changing the unit size and those types of things. Yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting idea. Tiny homes have been mentioned as a potential collaboration development type project. They're not popular everywhere, but they have been used in other parts of the West. Yeah. And then abandoned, yeah. So thank you. So any available properties that are either not in use or vacant land or other types of things could be opportunities for development and collaboration on those sites. So that was mentioned yesterday. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yep. Alternative housing options. Yeah. Yeah. Creativity is going to be part of this process, I think, just because of the difficulty with the current environment. Yeah. Housing environment. So all great suggestions. Thank you. Really good. We got quite a few that we had not had before, so this is greatly appreciated. Okay, if there's no other comments on the questions, I will turn it back over to Jennifer. She's going to wrap it up, kind of let you know what the next steps are. And but you can still use the chat if you want to make comments. Thank you.
Absolutely. Feel free to keep adding your thoughts. I am going to add to the chat a link to HUD's income limits for most of its programs. Someone had asked about, what is low income, very low income, that sort of thing. And so this is a link to HUD's chart on different income levels that apply to some of their programs. that link goes to the Arizona pages, and so you just have to find the one that applies to Mesa. That said, HOME-ARP actually focuses on those definitions for qualifying populations, which are more driven by specific criteria within the population than just these straight data tables for income limits. So HOME-ARP is a little bit different, but to help you understand in HUD world what does low income mean, that may be a good resource. So if you join the meeting partway through, because I know a bunch of folks did, I was letting them in, feel free to add your name, organization affiliation if you have one, your zip code and your email address to the chat. That will help us track everyone on a sign-in sheet for today's session so we can demonstrate the participation that we had during this meeting. Next steps, we have another community meeting later today on services, and then another meeting next week in the evening. The city will be announcing that day and time on its website and on its Facebook page. So if you're interested in joining, or someone else maybe was interested but couldn't make it during the daytime hours, there is going to be an evening meeting next week. So 2 more opportunities for folks to chime in. We do have that survey that we would greatly appreciate folks sharing so that we can get as many responses as possible. And Alex, if you can just drop that into the chat one more time, they'll be able to take you right to it. The next step in this process is for us to complete a draft of the allocation plan, and then that plan will be published for a 15-day public comment period. And in that plan, you'll see a summary of all the data that we collected, a summary of this consultation process, and then the plan will talk about the use of the funds that the city is proposing. If folks have comments on that proposed use of funds or anything else in the plan, they are welcome to submit comments during that 15-day public comment period. That is expected to start about February 15th. So you can keep an eye out for the start of the public comment period. So during the last 2 weeks of February, the draft will be out for folks to review. And then once comments are received, the city will consider them, incorporate them as appropriate into the plan, and then the plan will be submitted to HUD. HUD has 45 days to review the plan, and during that time, they will either ask for revisions, clarifications, that sort of thing, or they will approve the plan. So at a minimum, we're thinking somewhere in the range of early May would be the earliest that we'd have an approved plan. If HUD has requests for revisions to the plan, it will make the process a little longer. We may have to go into June, but you can expect that by summer, there will be an approved allocation plan, and that's the point at which the city will be able to start implementing its plan for using the HOME-ARP funds. So that's the overall process. As Doug said, you are free to continue using the chat to drop some thoughts in there. You can also email me. This is my email address here on the screen. Doug can put his email address in the chat. So if you want to contact either one of us with additional thoughts, we leave this meeting and you have some thoughts, oh, I wish I'd mentioned this, feel free to drop that in. If you work for an organization that collects data around any of these topics and you think it would be useful for us to see that data, we're always looking for more data to help round out the plan. So we'd welcome that as well. We are going to leave this chat up. We're going to leave the meeting open so that the chat is up for a few more minutes. So that way, if folks want to scroll back, grab a link, grab any information